Scandal. In the last of our series of interviews, we were hoping to talk to Boris Johnson here today, but he was unable to be with us. Joining me instead is Kit Malthouse, who has been one of his deputies for the last 4 years. Welcome to you. Did Boris Johnson not want to do this today?
Well, as you were told in March, Tim, Boris had a long-standing engagement that he had to do this morning. Even for his old friends at BBC London, I'm afraid he was unable to move it.
What's he doing? Is he out campaigning or not?
So he has a private engagement this morning.
He didn't want to come and defend his record in person.
Tim, you were told back in March that he couldn't make it. There's been a long-standing issue. You can make an issue of it or you can ask for some information.
Probably wouldn't be able to make it. But OK, you're here. Let's put to you the questions we would have asked him. Is Boris Johnson pleased with the government's economic plans, their progress, the austerity measures and so on?
Well, I think Boris recognises that the government has done London a good deal. I mean, he's been on the phone badgering George Osborne and David Cameron. I've actually witnessed some of those telephone conversations myself to get London the deal it needs. And he has promoted a simple philosophy, which is this. London is the heart of the UK economy. It's the beating heart often of the European economy, and it needs investment. And so he has, over the last 4 years, extracted billions of pounds for investment in the basic infrastructure of London to produce an economic machine, if you like, that will be the rival of the world. And in those circumstances, I think he does think the government's done the city well.
And was he pleased, for instance, that the Chancellor bowed to what he's been asking for repeatedly, lowering the top rate of tax for the very rich?
Well, I think what Boris has done over the last 4 years is take a lot of flack, if you like, for standing up for London's competitiveness across the world.
Did he take
You've got to remember,
because the Chancellor obviously listened to him and said reduce the top rate of tax.
Can I just put it in context? You've got to remember we've been dealing with the biggest, financial crash for the last, 50, 60 years. The financial services industry was in a very bad odour with lots of people. Boris recognised early on, and I have to say I think he called it right, that it would be a mistake to jump on the bandwagon of trashing that industry and, yes, some of the very high-paid people.
I think a lot of people saw that. I'm just saying he's happy that has happened and happy with what we have to do to pay for that, like, for instance, freezing tax relief for pensioners, the granny tax, if you like.
Well, I don't think he necessarily backs the entire balance of things that were in the budget. I think there are a number of things that he has some question mark over. But at the same time,
because they're harmful,
well,
are they?
his view was that for London to remain competitive, to attract the best and the brightest here, and to attract, the headquarters of some huge financial institutions, we had to be tax competitive. And having a higher rate tax rate at 50% didn't put us in that position.
Would he prefer it to go down a little bit more?
Well, he was putting people off coming. And you've got to remember, Tim, that when those very high-paid people come, he didn't give them unqualified support, but when they come, they also bring with them a cascade of wealth throughout the city. They bring with them jobs, they bring rents for landlords in buildings, they bring cleaning jobs, supply jobs, middle management, accountants, lawyers. All those people benefit from that wealth coming to the city.
One last part on this section. Happy with the benefit changes in the cap, which we're seeing already are forcing hundreds and will force hundreds of Londoners to move from their homes.
Well, no, Boris wasn't happy with that. And as you know, he berated the government and managed to extract from them three things. He extracted a transitional arrangement, he extracted 100 million for the boroughs, and he extracted a number of landlord incentives to try and make housing cheaper so that people who are at benefit levels could stay in their homes. There is no need, we believe, for people to export, people out of London. We think the arrangements that have been put in place to soften, if you like...
Soften, as you say, they are transitional, 3 or 4 years down the line. Transitional, but it will happen. And he won't be able to do anything about it.
But Tim, the housing benefit bill is 20 billion quid. It's something needs to be done about that.
Yeah.
That needs to be done in a gradual way so that people are not damaged or affected significantly in any way.
Okay.
And Boris personally extracted those concessions from the government for the people of London.
Let's look at the flagship policies which have defined him, just the cycle hire scheme to begin with. Is he disappointed that this hasn't made the money? It is not going to be self-financing. It's a drain on public resources, contrary to what he said.
I think his overall view of the cycle scheme is a great one. That's why we're expanding it. It's going east to the Olympics. It will be going west in the next couple of years as well.
But on the question of the money.
And once it is expanded and there is wider use, then there will be greater recovery of the underlying cost, and it may over time, hopefully,
Expansion
become financing.
means wider costs.
But fundamentally, Tim, you know, when you're providing public transport infrastructure, very often it is not done at full cost recovery. You know, the buses get a subsidy, the tube, the National Rail, all of it gets a subsidy.
Absolutely fine. I think people understand that, but disappointed that he said he promised that.
No.
And it hasn't happened.
No.
It was going to be self-financing.
He's incredibly pleased with the amount of private sponsorship he got in. We would like it, yes, to be making more money than it is, but nevertheless we recognise that this is a public good. This is something that is trying to get a shift in the mindset of Londoners about how they travel around the capital. And
I'm glad you mentioned the sponsorship. I wanted to check.
Can I finish?
I just wanted to check on the sponsorship, because he said he's pleased with that. Is he pleased with up to £25 million from Barclays Bank, whose chairman, Bob Diamond, made £17 million in 1 year this year? Is that enough?
Well, I think he would have liked to have got more. I think 25 million quid was the best bid at the time. The expansion hopefully will extract more, and the expansion west even more again. But again, you know, one of the new things that Boris has brought. Never before had a mayor extracted tens of millions of pounds of private sponsorship into public works. This is money that is given for public good, and he got that personally himself. And that's, I think, quite an achievement.
What about the other flagship measure, which was to tackle the underlying causes of youth crime? The man, the architect, the civil servant, if you like, that designed the time for action, said virtually nothing had been done. How does the mayor react to that?
Well, obviously, Tim, as you know, that was part of my remit as well, and I react very badly to that because I think that's a slur on the work of many people who were in that man's team over 4 years.
He's just saying it didn't work. You didn't do anything.
No, he said virtually nothing. Tim, you've been down to Feltham and seen the prison unit there. That is a sign of what we've been doing. If you'd bothered, we could have taken you out to see the thousands of extra cadets who across the city who are now involved.
Virtually nothing. You haven't done anything to tackle the underlying causes of youth crime, particularly as it affects young black people.
Tim, at some stage in this interview, you're going to have to allow me to finish and answer to a question.
You're getting plenty of time to finish. Go ahead.
Just finish. We have put together a comprehensive plan working backwards from Young Offenders Institute through young people's lives, looking at where things are going wrong and where they're getting into crime. That is dealing with some very difficult issues and some very difficult young people.
Granted.
These are young people who were neglected for many, many years before. You know, this is new work that City Hall didn't do before. Ken said, if it bleeds, it leads. I'm not bothered about
And are you disappointed that the progress has not been good?
No, I'm not, actually. I'm pleased with the progress.
Is the mayor disappointed?
No, he's not.
Boris Johnson
No. One of the critical things here, Tim, and this is one of the things that BBC London always goes for Boris on. You know, Boris is somebody who sets ambitious targets. He does. We don't resile from that. We set ourselves very ambitious targets because we are driving a machine here. TfL, City Hall, the Met Police, we set hard targets to hit. And if we fall short of those targets, that doesn't mean we failed. It means that we've made progress, but we just haven't quite hit our ambitions.
Does Boris Johnson regret misleading people about the effectiveness of the Feltham unit and that programme, as you said, with his giving of false statistics about how it was impacting on reoffending?
Well, Tim, you're misleading people. He didn't give false statistics. He gave the best statistics that he'd been given at the time.
They were unreliable statistics, which the officials had expressly said to Boris Johnson, and presumably you should not use publicly, about the reoffending rate, claiming great things for this unit which were not empirically proven.
Well, Tim, they were early statistics. They were always in the framework of there going to be an independent evaluation. I know you've had a bit of an obsession, frankly, with this scheme over the last 2 or 3 years.
The Howard League for Penal Reform just said, why are they making these claims? You know that it is not possible to make the claims about reoffending.
Tim, one guy from the Howard League who you repeatedly go to for negative quotes about the scheme has said that again and again.
You know, that's not entirely true.
If you look at the...
Can I just give you a paragraph?
You put him in every report you do about it.
Let me just give you the paragraph from the own official evaluation.
Well, you can talk more in the interview
than me. A small number of young people released from the unit, their potential motivation to change their offending behaviour, i.e. they're predisposed to change anyway, and the lack of an adequately matched control group mean no firm conclusions can be drawn. You picked a group of people where you can't tell that Feltham made the difference. They were going to not reoffend anyway, if indeed they haven't been reoffending.
Tim, that's not true. If you look at the Ipsos...
They're in black and white.
If you look at the Ipsos Mori report, there is much about that scheme that is good. We've had some fantastic stories. Young men coming out of Feltham who've gone straight to university. We are trying to turn lives around, but I'm not going to pretend to you this is not difficult. And just because you and your pals at BBC London decide to have a go at the scheme doesn't mean to say we're going to stop doing it.
Professor Gus John, an educationalist, has said your policy for youth crime was a sham. You have done not enough, nothing,
Tim,
to understand the underlying causes of black youth crime.
Can I speak now? Okay. Tim, we started out on a very, very difficult job 4 years ago. The gangs, the knives, all of them had been left unattended for 8 years under Ken Livingstone. These were deep-seated problems that had infected the minds of young people and communities over a number of years. Turning that around is a very difficult job and is going to take a lot longer than 4 years' time. If I can finish, please. What we tried to do was address the issue through policing, to look at the enforcement side and if we could improve that, and at the same time do some of that longer-term work. But the critical word there is longer-term, and we learn as we go. And the proof of the pudding is the numbers. Teenage killings are half what they were back in 2008.
Serious youth crime going up every year.
That's not true either.
I'll tell you what, let's not get involved. Let's not get involved in a dispute about the numbers just yet. And let's look at the wider picture. It was his main pledge, very resonant, to hold the Metropolitan Police to account during his term. How badly does he feel about how he failed over the phone hacking scandal, which brought the Metropolitan Police to their knees last year? Holding the Metropolitan Police to account, to investigate, News International, they didn't do their job, did they?
Well, Tim, I find it very odd that you're posing this in the sort of framework of some kind of failure of Boris. Boris was briefed on a regular basis by the third most senior police officer in the land about the progress of the hacking investigation. He was given evidence, he was given briefings from John Yates that led him to make certain public statements.
But didn't challenge them, did he? Didn't challenge them, didn't ask the questions. There are all these people apparently emerging who have had their phones hacked, and he didn't ask the questions, did he?
Subsequently, he received a letter of apology from John Yates to say that the information that had been given was not necessarily correct, and after that, then he has put...
I think people knew that, but I'm saying at the time, this importance of this constitutional role, holding the police to account, was it right, for instance, for him to be pursuing commercial arrangements, deals, with News International when they were under suspicion, their staff, over phone hacking?
What commercial deals?
A partnership to open a new mayoral academy, a News International mayoral academy in East London, interesting them in the cable car. There were regular discussions going on. Did you not know about those?
Tim, you've got to put two parts of the equation together here. On one side, he's being told by the third most senior police officer in the land, there's nothing in this and there is no ongoing investigation. On the other side, he has this very large employer in London who's willing to put private money into academies or whatever it may be.
But isn't that the issue? Now, he got this. There was a conflict of interest here, wasn't there?
No.
He was the person constitutionally in charge of the police, and he was embarking on these dealings, and there were lunches and dinners, we can put those aside, seeking commercial partnerships with News International.
Tim,
was that right?
This is a sort of rather crafty kind of smear attempt, which is frankly a bit beneath you.
A conflict of interest.
No, it is. I mean, throwing in that little line about lunches and dinners, oh, we'll forget all that. This is a straight smear, Tim, and you should stop it because it's not fair. Look, it's not right and it's not fair.
Do you want to address it? Would it have been right when there was an ongoing, there were concerns being raised by parliamentary committees?
Boris was a victim of phone hacking himself. He relied on information that he was given by extremely senior police officers, and indeed, I might say, by the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police himself, and I think that's a perfectly legitimate and fair thing to do.
Would it have possible? I haven't suggested...
For you to suggest otherwise, Tim, is pretty disgraceful.
I haven't suggested. You'll know that other politicians are being accused of trying to curry favour with News International. I just put it to you, was this an appropriate way? Did it lead to this hacking scandal not emerging as it might have done?
No.
Through Boris Johnson, who has constitutional responsibility, was it an error of judgment to have been so close to News International during his mayoralty?
Tim, I have to say this is pretty disgraceful. Boris has behaved with complete probity throughout this issue. As you know, he was a victim of
judgment.
He was a victim of phone hacking himself. And if we're talking about judgment, maybe we should talk about Ken Livingstone, who was at the employ of Mr. Murdoch, writing for The Sun for many years, and now suddenly seems to have forgotten all that stuff.
I think we're talking about partnerships. We're talking about public money. We're talking about two things happening at the same time. A guarantee, hacking victims may well have suggested, of wanting to know the extent of phone hacking. He was the person that could put pressure, ask the right questions of the Metropolitan Police. As we see, that didn't happen.
No.
At the same time...
No, Tim, you're making massive leaps and assumptions here, which are literally unwarranted. Boris was briefed and asked questions in those briefings about phone hacking. He got reassurances from the most senior police officers in the land that everything was fine, that there was no requirement to reopen the investigation, and he relied on that information. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. If he had done anything different, if he had put pressure on the Metropolitan Police to reopen the investigation, that would have been equally as improper.
OK, I'll stay with us. Given the economic dip, austerity